of sin. The first thing that we had to do was kind of define sin. Well, what's a sin 1.0 definition of sin? The easiest one that comes to mind, sin is when you break one of the 10 commandments, right? Sin is breaking the 10 commandment. Sin is doing something wrong, doing something that's wrong or that hurts others. Sin is going against God. Those are some basic sin 1.0 definitions. I think also we might be familiar with the idea that sin is missing the mark. So that comes from the Greek translation. The Greek word for sin is translated as missing the mark. The Hebrew word, going astray, is very similar. And what it means, it's kind of used in the context of someone, an archer, or someone who's throwing a spear and they miss the target. So that's missing the mark. And that's kind of how we've been told to look at sin. Well, here's something awesome. The way you define a word almost determines how you understand it and how you respond to it. So this whole idea of sin as missing the mark, there's some truth to it, but in the context of our relationship with God, sin is way more than just missing the mark. It's way more than just missing the mark. So David Nicotra, David, he just read the word and it was so good and I enjoyed how he read it. And he was reading from 1 John chapter 1. And that's pretty much where we're going to live today. We're going to be looking at 1 John chapter 1, starting at verse 5. And it starts off in 1 John chapter 1, verse 5 by saying that God is light. And in him there is no darkness at all. Love that. Here's what's good. Before we even go into the word at all on any subject, I think we should acknowledge that God is holy. God is supreme. And this is whose word we're going into. But especially before we define and try to understand sin, I think the problem with sin as missing the mark is sin as missing the mark, I guess the focal point of the definition is me and what I'm doing. The focal point of the definition of sin is God, actually, and who God is. God is light, and in him there is no darkness. Once you understand, I guess, the full extent of the majesty of God, you understand what the absence of sin is. And then as we kind of see that God is way more righteous than we give him credit for, as we understand that, then we begin to see, wait a minute, I'm way more sinful than I acknowledge. So the definition of sin is not just missing the mark, although the word could be used in that context. But in the context of our relationship with God, sin is really cosmic treason, actually. That's how deep it is. Now here's the problem with missing the mark. Oh, Neville's not here. Neville's been to one of my softball games. All right? You don't know, softball is a game where you take a bat, okay? And someone throws a ball, and the objective is to hit the ball with the bat. Yes? I think I've done it maybe once. You do it. I'm horrible at softball. I miss the ball every time. But guess what? Every time I come back to the dugout, my team is just like, hey, good job. You weren't out there too long. You know? No one treats it like I did something really horrible. You know, they're just like, hey, you're getting better, Q. You're getting better. You almost hit it. She knows that's true. Missing the mark, it downplays it a whole lot. It makes it seem like, oh, it's just a mistake. It waters it down so much. When we understand that God is light and in him there is no darkness, we recognize that sin, even the smallest piece of sin, to God, it like permeates. It's obvious, it's magnified, and it stinks. Just the smallest piece of sin.